When billionaire Bill Gates believed he could outwit Ibrahim Traore with a fake malaria agreement, he underestimated the intelligence and courage of the young African leader. What was intended to be an easy manipulation quickly collapsed as Traore exposed the truth in front of everyone. Gates's expression revealed everything: shock, regret, and humiliation. This unforgettable clash has ignited worldwide conversations about justice, integrity, and Africa's struggle against exploitation. The Grand Hall in Ouagadougou was filled with quiet tension. Representatives from foreign NGOs and local officials gathered, shifting their eyes between papers, laptops, and the young man standing at the head of the table, Captain Ibrahim Traore, transitional president of Burkina Faso. On the surface, the meeting appeared to be about a noble mission, fighting malaria. Yet beneath the polished smiles and glowing presentations, something darker was hidden. Bill Gates's delegates spoke of genetically modified mosquitoes, calling it a miracle solution. Millions of dollars were promised, technology from abroad, and swift eradication of disease. To the outside world, it sounded like salvation, but to Traore, something felt wrong. The fine print spoke louder than the promises. The so-called partnership demanded handing over control of Burkina Faso's land, laboratories, and even the health of its people to foreign hands. Then came the quiet whisper behind the curtains, a subtle suggestion of personal rewards, investments, and support if Traore approved the deal. What was meant to be a smooth negotiation began to feel like a trap. The young leader's eyes narrowed. The mask of charity was slipping, and the truth was about to appear. For hours, presentations continued, charts of malaria rates, maps of villages, statistics that seemed overwhelming. The foreigners painted a picture of urgency. Act now, or thousands more would die. But Traore's instincts told him something was wrong. Why were they so desperate to rush the agreement? Why was control of Burkina Faso's health data, soil, and even mosquito populations included in foreign contracts? As he examined the documents, one line stood out: all experimental rights retained by the funding institution. His chest tightened. This was not only about malaria, it was about ownership. Later that evening, Traore sat with his closest advisors. Musa, his loyal guard, spoke softly. "Excellency, their solution looks like a gift, but gifts with strings are chains. Once bound, we will never break free." Traore leaned back, thinking of his people, farmers, children, mothers, who had already endured centuries of exploitation. Could he allow another deception disguised as charity? No. Something within him burned. He would not surrender. He resolved that the truth must be revealed, and revealed openly. The next morning, the meeting resumed. Cameras recorded, journalists scribbled notes, and the hall filled with eager eyes. Bill Gates himself was present this time, confident, composed, and certain of victory. His team presented the final offer: $500 million in funding, with a promise to make Burkina Faso a model for Africa. Applause echoed from some corners of the room, but Traore remained still, his hands clasped. Finally, he rose to speak. His voice was calm, yet sharp enough to cut through the polished speeches. "We are not here to sell our land. We are not here to give away our sovereignty. Burkina Faso is not an experimental laboratory. Our people are not guinea pigs." The room froze. Gates blinked, his smile stiffening. Cameras zoomed in on his face. Shock, unease, and a faint trace of embarrassment. Traore lifted the contract high for all to see. "You call this a fight against malaria. I call it what it is: exploitation." Gasps rippled across the hall. The smooth deal had shattered, and the world was about to witness every fracture. The silence was heavy with disbelief. Reporters paused mid-scribble, uncertain if they had heard correctly. Officials shifted uncomfortably, avoiding each other's eyes. Bill Gates leaned forward, forcing a smile. "Captain Traore, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. This is about saving lives, not exploitation." But Traore's eyes did not waver. his voice cut like steel. If this were truly about saving lives, why do the contracts grant foreign companies control over our soil, our laboratories, and even our health data? Why are the rewards written in gold for outsiders, while my people are left with risks and silence? Murmurs spread across the hall. Journalists leaned closer, cameras tightened their focus. Gates's polished mask began to crack. His fingers tapped nervously on the table. Musa, the guard, stood at the edge of the room, sensing it. The air was thick. The tide was turning. For the first time, the billionaire appeared small. Cornered by truth he thought no one would dare to speak aloud. And Traore was not finished. He raised a stack of documents from the table, his tone calm but firm. This clause, he read aloud, states that all genetically modified samples remain property of the funding institution. This other clause grants exclusive research rights abroad. Tell me, is this truly a fight against malaria or a theft of sovereignty? Gasps filled the air. Cameras flashed furiously. Some officials hid their faces in their hands. Gates shifted uneasily in his chair, his jaw tightening. His usual calm confidence seemed shaken, replaced by the heavy weight of being exposed before millions. Traore dropped the papers onto the table, the sound cracking sharply through the hall. Our people will not be laboratory rats. Burkina Faso will not be bought. Journalists could no longer contain themselves. Questions erupted, voices overlapped, and every camera focused on Gates's pale, rigid face. Leaders had bowed their heads in such halls. Today, one stood tall, and the entire world was witnessing it. Bill Gates raised his hand, attempting to calm the storm. Let us be reasonable. These projects have global support. You risk isolating your country. But his words were drowned out by Traore's reply. Burkina Faso would rather stand alone with dignity than kneel with shame. If you truly want to help, come with respect, not with chains disguised as charity. The audience erupted. Some applauded, others shouted in agreement. The press captured every flicker of emotion across Gates's face, the tightened lips, the restless eyes, the rare image of a man unprepared for resistance. This was no longer about contracts. It was about power. Who held it and who refused to surrender it. Outside the hall, crowds were already gathering, waiting anxiously for news. As soon as the first video clips hit the internet, phones buzzed across the continent. Messages spread rapidly. Traore stood up to Gates. Africa is not for sale. In that moment, the false deal collapsed. But the battle ahead, political, economic, and personal, was only just beginning. Within hours, the confrontation dominated international media. Footage of Traore holding up the contract spread like wildfire. Headlines blazed. African leader confronts Gates over fake malaria deal, and Traore defends sovereignty in heated exchange. In Ouagadougou, crowds poured into the streets. Young men painted murals of lions on city walls with the words, "Africa is not for sale." Mothers holding babies whispered prayers of gratitude, saying, "At last, someone speaks for us." Meanwhile, in luxury offices in Washington, London, and Geneva, the mood was grim. Advisors scrambled to control the damage, issuing carefully crafted statements about Gates's commitment to health and dismissing Traore's accusations as misunderstandings. But the video clips told a different story. Gates's stiff, uneasy expression had become a global symbol of embarrassment. Traore, however, did not celebrate. That evening, he sat quietly with his advisors, speaking little but listening intently. Finally, he said, "This is not about humiliation. It is about dignity. We must show the world that integrity cannot be bought. Not today, not ever." The fight had left the hall. Now it was on every screen. The following day, a private meeting was requested. Gates's representatives tried to pressure Burkina Faso's officials, warning of aid cuts, travel bans, and diplomatic isolation. But Traore's response was steady and unshaken. If aid comes with chains, it is not aid. It is slavery, and Burkina Faso will not wear chains. The room fell silent. The foreign delegates exchanged uneasy glances. They were used to leaders who bowed quickly. But this young captain was different, waited anxiously. Rumors of sanctions and punishment spread, but so did songs of resistance. Women selling mangoes in the market sang softly, "Better poor with honor than rich in shame." That night, Traoré walked quietly through the streets with only Musa by his side. The people recognized him and rushed forward, some kneeling, some weeping, all repeating the same words, "Thank you for protecting us." Musa whispered, "They would rather go hungry than be sold." And Traoré knew then that the people's courage was stronger than any threat. By the third day, the confrontation had become the world's central topic. African youth on social media hailed Traoré as a hero, writing, "This is the Africa we dream of." Hashtags like Traoré the Lion and Africa Not for Sale trended globally. In Western capitals, panic grew. Analysts debated on television whether Burkina Faso had set a dangerous precedent, one that might inspire other nations to reject similar deals. Gates remained unusually silent. His advisors worked tirelessly to repair his image, but the viral footage of his rigid expression during the confrontation overshadowed every press release. The world had already made its judgment, a billionaire caught off guard by the courage of a young African leader. In Ouagadougou, schools held special assemblies. Teachers told children about the events, not as politics but as history in the making. Young boys shouted, "We will be lions too," while girls raised their hands and declared, "We will protect our land." Musa, standing guard at the palace gates, felt tears well in his eyes. This was no longer just about a single deal. It was about the very soul of Africa, and everyone could sense it. By the fourth day, the backlash had arrived. International organizations issued statements condemning Burkina Faso's reckless decision. Rumors of suspended aid began circulating through diplomatic channels. On television, analysts warned that Traoré was isolating his nation. Some even suggested that foreign investors might withdraw entirely. Inside the palace, advisors argued fiercely. A few urged compromise to ease the tension, but Traoré sat quietly, listening. At last he spoke, his voice steady. "If our independence can be sold for funding, then it was never independence at all. Let them take their aid. Our dignity is not up for negotiation." The room fell silent. Even his closest allies felt the weight of his words. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens began donating food, tools, and labor to local projects, determined to prove that Burkina Faso could stand on its own, without foreign strings. Women sang in the markets, "We are enough. We are strong." Yet as hope rose within the nation, shadows gathered outside. Whispers of retaliation spread. Gates and his allies were not finished. The real storm had yet to arrive. That evening, Traoré summoned his ministers for an emergency meeting. On the table, target malaria's facilities, labs filled with genetically modified mosquito samples funded by the Gates Foundation. Traoré listened intently as scientists explained the risks of releasing altered species into Burkina Faso's environment. After a long silence, he made his decision. Shut it down. Destroy every sample. Burkina Faso will not be a testing ground. Gasps filled the chamber. Some ministers hesitated, warning of international backlash. But Traoré was resolute. "Our ancestors fought to keep this land free. I will not allow invisible chains of science to bind us now." Within hours, the order spread. Bulldozers rolled into the facilities, guards took positions, and the destruction of mosquito cages was broadcast live. Crowds outside erupted in cheers, chanting, "Africa is not for sale." Across the globe, reactions split. Critics condemned the move as anti-science, while supporters hailed it as a historic stand. And somewhere, watching silently, Gates realized the game had slipped entirely from his control. By the fifth day, Gates's humiliation was no longer a private bruise. It had become a global spectacle. Clips of him sitting stiffly while Traoré exposed the deal dominated headlines. Memes flooded social media, side-by-side images of a lion standing tall and a billionaire shrinking in his chair. Across Africa, young leaders voiced their support. Some called Traoré's defiance the spark of a new Africa. Universities held debates about sovereignty. Churches and mosques offered prayers for Burkina Faso's courage. Inside the palace, Moussa watched his president from a distance. He saw the exhaustion in Traoré's eyes, but also the fire that refused to fade. That night, Traoré addressed his people directly on national television. His voice was calm, but his gaze carried steel. This week has shown us one truth. Dignity cannot be imported, and freedom cannot be donated. We must guard it ourselves, or we will lose it forever. The broadcast ended, leaving many in tears. Burkina Faso had chosen the harder road, but it was theirs, and the entire world was still watching. By the sixth day, pressure turned into open retaliation. International banks quietly froze transactions linked to Burkina Faso. Some aid shipments were delayed. Rumors of sanctions spread through the palace. Ministers panicked. Several urged Traoré to reconsider, to reopen negotiations with Gates's foundation, if only to ease the tension. But Traoré sat silently, then replied with calm determination. If freedom can be bought with food, then it is slavery disguised as aid. Let them keep it. We will eat from our soil and drink from our rivers. Even if it is bitter, dignity is sweeter. At the same time, thousands marched in the streets of Ouagadougou. Farmers carried baskets of millet and corn to the palace gates, chanting, "We will feed ourselves." Mothers brought water. Broadcasts, commentators sneered, calling it stubbornness. But across Africa, people saw something else: courage. Bill Gates, watching from afar, remained silent. His advisors pressed him to respond, but he knew one wrong word would only deepen his humiliation. That night, Traoré gathered his closest circle. Maps, reports, and intelligence were spread across the table. Advisors warned of foreign agents trying to stir unrest. Moussa, ever loyal, stood at the door but listened intently. The air was heavy, thick with unease. "Excellency," one minister began. They would not forgive this. They would attempt to destabilize him, perhaps even worse. Traoré leaned forward, his voice unwavering. "Then let them try. They believe Africa is asleep, but we are awake now, and a single spark can ignite 1,000 flames." Meanwhile, beyond the palace walls, ordinary citizens lit candles in their homes. Entire neighborhoods sang songs of resistance. Children repeated the words they had heard from their leader. Africa is not for sale. The world watched closely. Some believed Traoré would collapse under the pressure. Others feared the worst, an attempt to silence him forever. But Traoré had already made his decision. He was prepared to endure the storm, no matter how fierce. On the seventh day, the capital awoke to an astonishing sight. Tens of thousands of people crowded the central square, waving flags, singing songs, and chanting, "Traoré is our voice. We stand with dignity." The crowd was so immense that the city trembled with its chants. Farmers, teachers, soldiers, and children all stood shoulder to shoulder. Traoré stepped onto the palace balcony. He lifted his hand, and silence swept over the crowd. His words rolled like thunder. They thought Burkina Faso would kneel, but today I see a nation standing taller than ever before. They thought money could buy us, but our souls are not for sale. He pointed toward the people, his voice breaking with emotion. "Look at yourselves. This is the wealth of our nation, not their contracts, not their promises. You are the treasure, and I will protect you with my life." The square erupted with tears and cheers. Mothers lifted their children, soldiers saluted, and even the elderly wept openly. In that moment, it was not only Traoré who roared. It was the entire nation of Burkina Faso. The roar of its people echoed beyond its borders. Videos of Traoré's speech spread across social media. In Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal, students marched holding banners that read, "Africa is awake." In Europe, Debates erupted in parliaments about whether foreign NGOs had gone too far. For Gates, the humiliation only deepened. Major media outlets replayed the clip of his uneasy expression as Traoré ripped apart the contract. Analysts described it as the moment power slipped away. Memes spread faster than his foundation's press statements. Inside the palace, Traoré gathered his ministers. Sanctions threatened, yet his voice carried steady strength. Let them punish us. Every punishment will prove to the world they never came with kindness, and every sacrifice will prove our strength. Musa, his guard, felt his chest swell with pride. He realized this was greater than politics. It was history being written, not with money, but with courage. That night, families across Burkina Faso lit candles and prayed together. Mothers whispered to their children, "Remember this week. One day you will tell it to your own children." The nation's spirit had changed forever. On the final day of that week, Traoré returned to the same hall where the false deal had first been proposed. This time, the atmosphere was entirely different. No foreign delegates, no glossy presentations, only citizens, soldiers, and elders of the land. He stood before them, simply dressed, his words carrying the weight of the people's struggle. "We have been told that we are weak, that we cannot survive without the foreigner's hand. But this week, you have shown me our strength is greater than their gold. You are the heartbeat of this land, and as long as I breathe, no one will sell you." The crowd erupted, yet many wept. Old men lifted trembling fists. Women held their babies high as if blessing them with dignity. Even hardened soldiers wiped away tears. Traoré's voice softened as he ended. "A lion does not ask permission to roar, and Burkina Faso is a lion." In that moment, the young leader was not only speaking to his nation, he was addressing the entire world, and the world was listening. By week's end, the decision was final. The Target Malaria project was dismantled, the samples destroyed, and Burkina Faso had taken its stand. But the true victory was not in what was destroyed, but in what was born. Across Africa, conversations shifted, leaders were challenged, youth were inspired, and the idea of sovereignty became more than just a dream. From the palace gates, Musa felt tears stream down his face. He thought of his children and whispered, "You will grow up in a land that refused to bow." As for Gates, the clash left a permanent scar. No speech, no donation, no statement could erase the image of a billionaire outwitted by a soldier armed only with courage and truth. The story of that week would echo through generations. A young African leader who bore the weight of the world and chose dignity over submission.